Hello people, Zach here again today, and today's video is going to be my opinions on currency. We're going to be leading into the idea eventually of discussing my opinions on gold-based systems and why I think that's an awful idea. But let's go ahead and get started. So the principal problem that we're trying to solve here is that people need a way to exchange goods and services. And the most intuitive method of doing this is, of course, bartering or trading. And it's a very simple principle. You know, like I say, I offer you 3 pigs and you offer me 1 cow. And it's not because anyone anywhere decreed that 1 cow is worth 3 pigs. It's because to me personally, the cow is worth more than the 3 pigs I have, and to you, the 3 pigs is worth more than the cow you have. So there is a mutual agreement of consent between the two of us. Maybe we'll start throwing in other things to kind of sweeten the deal a bit. But that's the basic idea. But when you start to extrapolate this onto a public market, where you have a bunch of people that are gathering together in order to sell the services or goods that they have in exchange for others, things become more complicated. People always want to have the best deal, of course. They want to make sure that they're not getting ripped off. And how do they do that? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is you can keep track of what the average amount of one thing is traded for another. See, maybe one farmer was willing to trade 2 pigs for a cow, and one farmer was willing to trade 4 for a cow, and one was willing to trade 3 for a cow. And when you average it out, it comes to 3. And so, like, people can look at this and say, well, like, on average, it was like 3.2, or it was 3.3. And people can sort of figure out from this whether or not they're getting a decent deal. But, of course, the issue, of course, is that if you don't have pigs, you have to use something else to trade cows, don't you? Well, this is where you can start thinking about things in terms of ratios that can be combined together. Like, say, for example, I might have chickens, and maybe I can trade 3 chickens for 20 pounds of firewood, and then I can trade 20 pounds of firewood for 5 pounds of copper, and then I can trade 5 pounds of copper for 1 pig or something. And so, like, based off of these ratios, they can sort of figure out, like, if you know what one thing is worth in terms of another, you can convert to that original thing that you have. And based off of this, we can just select one of the things in the market to be the standard measure of all of the other things. So if we wanted to, that standard measure could be anything. It could be, we could measure everything in the entire market in terms of chickens. We could measure everything in the entire market in terms of pounds of copper. Or in terms of pounds of coal. Like, we don't really, there's not really anything that says that we have to measure one thing in terms of the other. But there's a history of choosing metals for this, and the reason in part has to do with the scarcity of metals. Because if you have wildly fluctuating supply, of course, you know, if you know that things are driven by supply and demand in terms of values goes, when you flood the supply, what you do is you create a surplus, which then drives up the value. I mean, then drives down the value of the thing. It's like inflation, pretty much. So one of the things that you want is you want to choose something that has a very stable supply, but you want to choose something that has a very stable demand as well, so that the value of the commodity that you're using to gauge the value of everything else is rather stable. And this is where things like gold fit really well, because one, gold has very small supplies. Like, there's very few ore veins, so it's not like it's unlikely that someone is going to come across a vein of gold and, like, destabilize the local economy. And it also means, because there's so few of them, that governments can very easily seize control of them and regulate them properly. But there's also, like, take for example the fact that gold can be easily pressed and stamped or shaped as needed. So if they want it to shape it into coins or into jewelry or stuff, it's usable for that option. That's one of the good things about it. But there's also just the fact that because there's such a small quantity of it, and because it's a material that's not very solid, I guess you should say it's very pliable material. You couldn't use it for tools. You wouldn't want to use it for machinery or anything like that because it's such a soft metal. So for anything mechanical, you wouldn't want to use gold for. It's just, one, it's too costly because there's so little of it, and two, it just doesn't have really good material properties for doing anything mechanical with. So the demand for gold is actually rather stable because of the fact that it's useless. Believe it or not, you can't really do much with it aside from jewelry. Of course, today it's a little bit different because we have the electronics industry, but back then it was a different story. So like I said, it has a stable supply, stable demand. It doesn't corrode or tarnish or rust, so you don't have to worry about it breaking down. It's shelf stable. That's another big thing. You don't want your measure of value to evaporate, literally, in the most literal sense. And so this sort of leads into the question, well, why don't we continue to use gold? Because it seems to fill all of the needs that we have, and it meets all of these criterias. And of course, the answer, it's multifaceted. So one, you have to consider the fact that because gold is a metal, that if you are measuring the value of things in terms of gold, normally you would do it by the weight of gold, but the quantities of gold that you have, they may not match up with the quantities that people are charging. Let's take, for example, let's say you go into a bar and you want to buy a beer, and the smallest piece of gold you have is a 5-gram piece of gold, but the bartender only charges 1 gram of gold for a beer. Now, he is not going to cut that gold on the spot to try to make it match up with the cost of the beer. What he's going to do is he's just going to take the whole 5-gram piece and he's going to credit 4 grams of gold to your account, or they're just going to mark it down as a loss. And of course, imagine if you have an entire market that does this. Like, imagine if you want to go to get a haircut, or if you want to get groceries, or if you want to really go anywhere and purchase something with gold, because they can't just easily subdivide the pieces that are there on the spot. It becomes a bit of a hassle. So what is the solution to this particular problem? Well, one was the tab system, but there's a lot of open tabs that you would have to have in all of these different places. What if you could have only one tab? Wouldn't that be neat? Well, that's basically what a checking system is. You take your gold into a bank, you deposit it into a vault, and they hand you a checkbook. So now when you go to your local bar and you order a beer, you can write them a check for the 1 gram of gold, and then they can cash the check in their account, and it will credit the 1 gram of gold to their account. Now, they may not be able to withdraw the 1 gram of gold. They might only be able to withdraw the smallest amount of 5 grams of gold at a time. But it's just the point that it's a simpler system, because now you don't have to manage all of these different tabs. However, this leads into another issue, which is the fact that people, one, have to head to the bank in order to cash these checks, and two, the banks themselves have to process many checks a day, because one person, like a bartender, might come in and he might have hundreds of checks because he's been collecting them throughout the week and from all of his different customers, and the bank has to process every single last one of those checks. So it's not really the best system in that regard. So how do you make it even simpler? Well, the even better way to make it simpler would be if the bank started issuing small pre-written checks that didn't have any specific name on them, like saying who it's from or who it's to, but were at different quantities that can be combined. Like, they might have one note that says it's worth 1 gram, another that's worth 5, another that's worth 10, another that's worth 25, going up in various intervals, and you can sort of combine them. And these notes could be exchanged between individuals, and you don't have to go to the bank to withdraw that specific amount. But if you go to the bank and you cash them in, they would give you back that quantity of gold that's written on the note. So this is more convenient to the people because they don't have to have a bank account. They don't have to go to the bank to cash the checks that are being given to them. And this is basically our initial currency. Now, the other aspect of this as well, as far as problems go with the gold-backed currency, is that it's very easy to counterfeit, because you can take any substance that you want and you can electroplate it with gold, or you can say, for example, you can alloy gold with tin. Or something. You can melt down gold and mix it with some other substance. So anywhere that's going to accept gold, or anyone who's going to buy gold, is running the risk where they have to basically have a metallurgist or a chemist on site to test the metal to make sure that it actually is what it is and that it's of a high purity. And this can be done in various different ways. Like they might have to test the density of the substance, and they might have to test the conductivity of the substance and the thermal properties of the substance. Maybe they have to test it with various acids to see what types of acids will corrode the surface of it, because some acids will eat through the less noble of the metals, but they won't eat through things like gold. So a whole bunch of different tests have to be done, and it'd be easier if you just had one place that you could go to that could test all of these different things, rather than trying to have metallurgists on site for every single place that accepts gold. So it's another thing as well, where it's reducing the risk that these companies would have if they would delegate to a bank. Now, of course, the system I was talking about here, it's based off of a fixed rate system. So like if it says 5 grams of 5 grams of gold on the note, and you take it to the bank, that means it is literally worth 5 grams. It's not like 1/39 billionth of the amount that's in the reserve right now or something, where like if the amount increases in the reserve or decreases in any way, that it'll affect the value of your dollar. That's a fractional reserve system, and that's not something that I would advocate for. I actually think that's an evil system, in my opinion. And that's actually a socialistic system when you think about it, because you're talking about something, it's collective ownership of a particular commodity, and it's the whole purpose of the collective ownership is actually to redistribute wealth. It's usually so that banks can take money that's not theirs and lend that money out to other people for interest. But anyways, so you know my opinions on why gold's not a viable thing. And so now let's talk about cryptocurrencies for a second. And I think these are actually a much better option, because unlike gold, where you basically have to have a trained metallurgist or chemist on site, and where the ability to verify that what you've gotten is actually gold and a high quality hinges upon the knowledge, skills, and equipment of the person who's doing the work. Things like Bitcoin or Monero or other cryptocurrencies actually only rely on the automated policy-based consensus among a bunch of individuals who share a common history, and that history can't be falsified. So in that sense, it's actually much easier and less error-prone. One, it's way less way less costly to have an automated system do that than it is to pay a metallurgist, and it's also way more accurate. Of course, you run into another series of problems. Like one is like you have to have internet connectivity to engage in, like, interact with the system, and it also it takes certain times for transactions to go through. Like take for example, I believe that the complexity of the problems that they're using for the notarization signatures, I believe that it's adjusted so that a block of transactions takes about 10 minutes to go through, and that's just not acceptable for average consumer goods. Like you wouldn't want to wait in line at a checkout for 10 minutes for your transactions to go through. That's just unacceptable. Now, there is a solution to this. One is that rather than the people owning their own wallets, they get an account with a crypto exchange, and the crypto exchange will usually give them like a small card that they can use. But basically all of the transactions are being done offline, where the crypto exchange is actually handling the transaction through an offline debit system, but then like converting it internally into transactions between local accounts and transactions with other exchanges or other people who actually own physical wallets. So again, it's like a second layer of complexity, and this is where I see there's a pattern. I think that the ideal system actually involves two different types of currencies. There's the primary currency, which is the one that you want to be non-fungible. It's like a non-fungible global currency where no one can actually control the supply, and that it's a relatively stable thing. But because of the criteria that's necessary for that particular type of currency, it wouldn't be viable as a regular consumer currency. So you would have a secondary one, which is a representation of the thing, because the representation is easier to trade than the actual thing itself. Now, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about this subject, but I think that's about. I think it's about it. Let me see here. Yeah, that's pretty much the sum of it. Thanks for watching.